Hello and welcome to Think Watercolour. Today I'm going to use this reference photo to demonstrate the use of figures as a focal point in your watercolours. This is a photo I took a couple of years ago at St Ives Harbour in Cornwall at low tide. It was taken around noon on a fairly hazy but sunny day, so the light was coming down from directly overhead, hence the shadows being more or less directly beneath the subject. Now I've sketched the image on this piece of Saunders Waterford 300 gram rough paper, and I've edited out the Land Rover and some of the figures as I thought they wouldn't help with the overall composition. And I've paid careful attention to the men and the boat as they're going to be the main focus of the painting. But I've only loosely indicated the background hills and harbourside buildings, as I want them to be loosely painted so that they don't distract from the main subject. One of the things to remember with photos taken on a mobile phone's camera is that there's often very little depth of field, and the camera will pick up far more background detail than the human eye would normally perceive. So let's get started. I want the sky to be very light and hazy, so I'm going to be using very watered down washes. And I'm starting with cerulean blue at the top and then blending in some Naples yellow. Letting it all blend wet in wet. I'm working on dry paper, by the way. And for the beach, I'm just putting a very light wash, initial wash of raw sienna. I'm going to let the initial washes of the sky and the beach dry before continuing. Okay, the initial washes are dry now, and I've just mixed up some sap green with a small amount of lavender just to mute it a little bit, so it's quite a muted green for the background. And just washing that in and adding a little bit of sap green here and there just to vary the tonal values. Keeping it very vague. The idea is to keep the sky in the background all muted to avoid drawing attention away from the men working on their boat in the foreground. Just added a touch of cobalt blue as well to the mix. This is going to dry much lighter, and the idea is that it's not noticeable. While the hillside's drying, I've mixed up some cobalt teal for the hull of the boat, just an initial wash, fairly light. I'll be adding darker shadows a bit later once this wash is dry on the boat. This is a light first wash of warm red for the sails and the sail covers inside the boat. And for the town, I've just mixed up some burnt sienna with the blue sky mix, and I'm just dropping it in, leaving patches of white for some of the white houses on the hillside, keeping it very, very, very loose, not trying to follow the reference photo. In fact, I'm barely looking at that, so just keeping it very, very loose, an impression of what's there rather than painting loads of detail. That way it's not going to interfere with the main subject of the painting. I'm just darkening the underside of the hull on the boat there with another wash of the teal. For the mast, I am using a flat brush using burnt sienna, and just switching to a number 2 brush just for the timber work around the top of the hull, and I've added a touch of Van Dyke brown to the mix just to darken it slightly. For the keel of the boat, I've added even more Van Dyke brown to make it even darker under there. It's in the shade anyway, and it would appear darker. I'm just painting in the shadows and on the sails and the covers with a stronger mix of that warm red. Here I'm just touching in a few details, adding a little bit more shadow here and there on the underside of the hull, and I'll add some to the covers as well, just to strengthen the shadows a little bit, give it some definition. For the shadow under the boat, I've just added a touch of Imperial Purple to the existing blue mix that I already had, and just indicating the outline of the shadow, not worrying about hard edges because I'll be going over it with some darker sand colours later. Just putting a few dabs here and there to suggest shadows for footprints. Again, I'll be painting over those, but they will show through. As I said at the beginning, the light was coming from virtually overhead, so the shadows will be fairly tight to the boat. And here I'm working on the detail of the clothing on the men working on the boat. The initial wash, I'll be adding some shadows and lighter parts on the clothing once these initial washes have dried. Change the colours from the reference photo slightly just to make it more interesting. For the rigging, I'm just using a rigger, very simple, few lines. I may come back and add to them a bit later, but just want to get them in roughly positioned. This is neutral tint that I'm using for those. I'm just using the side of a brush to pick up the texture of the paper with a stronger mix of the raw sienna for the beach, just darkening areas nearer to us and picking up texture. As I said, the further away you get with the beach, the less texture you will see. It just evens out to the eye. But closer to us, you will always see some texture. So just adding that in and just adding a little bit of the brown there. That's burnt sienna mixed in with the raw sienna. Just adding a bit more detail on the figures. I'm paying really careful attention to these figures. They are the focal point, but without putting every detail in. I'm not trying to paint the eyes and every detail. It's just a suggestion of what's there, but keeping it fairly tight. And you'll see once it's dry and it's finished that these figures will, to the eye, look fairly realistic without having too much detail on them. I'm just adding some of the shadows and shading on the clothing on the men leaning against the boat. Adding these shadows on the clothing creates that three-dimensionality that you need for figures to look solid and real. Again, without going into a lot of detail, just a suggestion of shadows is all you need. Again, I'm not slavishly copying the reference photo. I've barely looked at it, so My advice when you are using reference photos is try not to be too slavish about working from them. Have them nearby by all means, and only refer to them when you really need to. I'm just adding the ropes off the hanging off the boat, again using a rigger, not forgetting that there's a little bit of a shadow underneath those two ropes, front and rear. Very soft shadow because it's a very hazy day. Here I'm going to add some figures in the middle distance that they're not in the reference photo, but I want to put them in because it will lead the eye into the painting a little bit. And as you can see, you really need no detail at all. I've got two adults and a child. Always remember to keep the heads very small. Tendency for beginners especially is to paint the heads too big. Not forgetting a little bit of shadow underneath them. And just in the far distance, just a few little marks to indicate some people a long way away at the other end of the beach. You'll notice that the heads on the figures in the middle distance are at the same level as the men working on the boat. And this is all about perspective of figures. I'll put a link at the end of this video to my video on how to position figures in your paintings easily using perspective. And I think I'm pretty much finished now. One thing to mention, I did change the rigging and forgot to film it, so there we have it in this finished work. As you can see, the background is very vague and fair and very muted, and it enables the foreground subject matter to really stand out. And those figures that I added lead the eye into the painting, into the distance where you can see even smaller figures. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, do give it a like. It really helps with YouTube. And do subscribe and hit the notification bell for future videos. And thanks again for watching.